Boom! What's up, everybody? Got Jeremiah Brown on, somebody that I've been following, and we honestly had to hit record because we were talking so much like off the screen, so to speak, to make sure that we got everything for you guys and make sure he shares his story. But before we get going and dive into everything that you've got going on, is as always, tell a wild or funny story, man. What you got for the people?
Man, well, Ryan, I really appreciate the opportunity to serve, on your platform. Truly admire you and the work that you're doing in this space. So I'm honored to share this space with you, man. I don't know if this is gonna be funny, but it was a time when I was supposed to be funny, and I ended up not being funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So my rookie year, this is 2012. I'm in the NFL. I signed a 3-year $1 million deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm this undrafted free agent who signed this contract. And I'm in this room with, safeties who just signed their second contract, making, several millions of dollars, and, safeties and defensive backs, the position I played, from all of these big time schools. I went to a mid-major school in New York City, and
Yeah.
every day we every rookie had to come to every meeting with either a current event or a joke. And this one day, it was my time. And mind you, I'm trying to learn a playbook, you know, 16 coverages, install, and all of this is happening. And they're like, we need a current event or a joke. And the night before, they sent us on a journey in Walmart where we had to get diapers, Skittles, seeds, you name it. We had to make sure we took care of the veterans. And during that moment, what I thought was funny, which it turned out not to be funny, um, but you had these football players in Walmart, extremely tired. We have our hoodies and sweatpants is on, but you have five big black guys going into Walmart with their hoodies on,
Yeah, yeah.
and everybody's watching us. Now, granted, are they watching us because we're professional athletes, because we have the Jaguars gear on, or are they watching us because we're these five men in this supermarket and they're trying to make sure we don't steal anything?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I thought it was funny, right? And when I got up and told this story, the look on my teammates and coaches' faces of just utter disappointment was just like the most defeat. It was like I got beat for a 90-yard pass. Like that's how
Yeah, yeah,
defeating it felt. And I was just like, comedy is not my thing. Right?
yeah.
Like that's not for me. But that's a moment where I was like, yep, that's not a part of the gift.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it makes me think of too of um, like what comedians have to go through too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I think it was actually I don't remember if I heard this from Joe Rogan or whatever, but it takes like I forget how many hours just to get like a 10-minute like skit down. And then you combine that into like an hour-long special and
Yeah,
just how much
yeah,
time that goes into that and
yep,
how much failure, right? Like how many people are like,
yeah,
oh, I thought that joke was funny.
absolutely.
Apparently y'all did it. I love it, man. I love it. Well, cool. I guess that's a good place kind of segue is like how did you end up coming into this space? Obviously, being an athlete, one of the things that like I'm always curious from coach's standpoint, and it'll be just from a different angle with you, obviously, with what you're doing and serving athletes and serving coaches and teams. Was it from more of like a place of pain? Was it more of a place of pleasure, or was it a little bit of hybrid of both? And just like what inspired you or what I called like pulled you into like what you're doing now?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a hybrid. It's definitely a combination of both, pain and pleasure. I'd say it started with the pain, in terms of where I was this highly sought after football player, never went to a school where from high school to college where everyone was getting scholarships or everyone was
Right.
getting drafted from. So I was always in an environment where the odds were stacked against me, and people saw the special in me as an athlete. And what that did was it created this like unrealistic world that I was living in where I
Mm,
only saw myself as this football player, to where now in 2013, I can no longer play football ever again because of a concussion I received during my rookie season. I signed a 3-year deal. I barely made it through my rookie season,
mm,
if at all. And that spun me down a really deep depression, suicidal ideations, you name it. And it was in that dark time that I had no sense of identity, no sense of purpose, and was just completely lost.
yeah.
And I found myself in aisle 16 of Home Depot working a shift. And it was in that painful moment. There's two stories that I typically tell. Um, and I won't necessarily like go too far left with sharing either of the stories, but just know that um, it was in that moment where I hit my rock bottom
Yeah.
of, man, how did this happen? And for me, it wasn't clear then, but it was like, okay, I played in the NFL.
Right.
Like I I I can do some things, you
Yeah.
know. Now I have to figure out how I can take that energy and apply it to the real world, so to say. I just didn't know where to start. And the last 10 and a half, 11 years has been me on that journey, and I'm on the pleasure side of it now,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
11 years later, because I truly believe I'm doing what I've been called to do, what I've been assigned to do, what my purpose is, and I'm just excited that I'm having a greater impact now than I would have ever as a football player.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Personally.
That's interesting though that you talk about being lost and then like as you mentioned like now on the side of like pleasure is more of like living your purpose
Yep.
is kind of I think a little bit of part of like my story is what I shared too is I think there's a lot of misinformation out there because when I was in college as a college athlete it was like everybody was like dude just find your purpose and like everything else in
Yeah.
life will like take care of itself and it's like
Yeah.
you're just supposed to go on this sabbatical and find your purpose but like when we're
Right.
lost as people it's really hard to find your purpose and so
Yep.
like what I always share is like identity comes first, right? Like you had
Yep.
to find yourself
Yep.
and then find out like what it is that like you were actually called to do,
Right.
or what lane or what path that was in. Um, do you agree? Is you kind of find the same thing? Is obviously like
Yeah.
identity is my jam. Like I feel like that is step one, the foundation of everything.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely believe I say clarity as a superpower, right? So being clear on who you are, being clear on whose you are, what you do, how you do it, all of those things really, because at the root of my suicidal ideations was I didn't feel like I belonged here. Like
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I there was purpose for me on earth without playing football, without putting on a helmet. And as crazy as that sounds, I'm not alone, right?
Yeah.
There are so many athletes, not just football, but just sports in general. And then when you look at the data in terms of, suicide rates and all of those things, and outside of the suicide rate, just the mental health and climate of sports, right?
Yeah.
Um, of course, any sport. So for me, that was definitely like huge, was that clarity piece. And it's a huge part of what I speak about now, in helping people identify with who they are, what they do, how they do it, and positioning them to thrive in whatever space or place they're in.
Yeah. And I think it's too, it's like like you're talking about like having a starting point of
Yep.
like getting clear about like who you are right now is
Yep.
the analogy I always like give is like when you go to punch in something to Google Maps, what's the first thing they have to know? And everybody's like your
Exactly.
destination. I'm like, no, 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 that's the second line. What's the line above that? And they're like your current location. I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Same concept here. It's like you got to know like where you are, like what's your starting place.
Yeah. That's
Is
good.
football the only
That's good.
thing? Is it a relationship? Is it
Yeah.
a hybrid of both? if you want to make money, like getting like what's your bank account now? Like what's
Yeah,
that
yeah,
number in there now? Like not what you
yeah,
want. Like that's the destination. But is there
yeah,
1,000 or 10,000? Because that's going to
yeah,
make a difference in the
yeah.
in the in the route that we go about. And so yeah, I think that a lot of people it's probably fear of like
Big time.
looking in the mirror, right? Of like, okay, where am I actually at right
Yeah,
now? Because I think that happens with a lot of the anxiety and the depression is most people, athletes, since we're on that topic, they kind of just shift from being an athlete to getting a career. And I'm like,
yeah,
like nothing changed.
yeah. Right, right, right.
You went from a whatever sport you play to doctor, lawyer, accountant, like whatever it is that you're doing. And it's like you never got clear. You just switched one title to the next. And I was like,
Yep,
that's the issue. Is like there's
yep,
so many layers to like who you are
yep.
and
Absolutely.
uncovering those. Why do you feel like I think for most people, like the rock bottom, like nobody craves the change until the rock bottom, right? Like when we
Sure.
talk identity, it's like, hey, like if you want to become more, like if you want more, you have to become more. And they're like, I like who I am now. I'm not saying you're a bad person, but what I am saying, if you want more, then you as a person has to become more. And they don't make that shift right until the doctor is like, hey, dude, eat another cupcake and might kick the
Uh,
bucket, or like smoke another cigarette and lungs are going to collapse.
yeah.
Like, why do you feel like most people wait until the darkest hour to make the change?
And that's so good. I'd say that I think is it's because oftentimes from my personal experience, and I'll speak for myself when I say this, experience is oftentimes the has been my greatest teacher,
Yeah.
in terms of I've learned that in every season, as I reflect and I look at the abundance that I get to live in, right, where organizations at different levels are reaching out to have me come in and present and view me as an expert in my space, right? Like those are like I didn't just wake up and I
Yeah.
got here, right? There was a series of different things that happened, but I would say that I am a reflection of the pain and pleasure, right? Of
Hmm.
of both experiences, and those experiences teaching me more of what I don't want to be
Yeah.
as opposed to who I want to be. You know what I mean? And I say for most people, sometimes they have to, or oftentimes they have to like get burned by the iron or
Yeah.
stove to know that the iron or stove is hot. Like it's like a baby. You can tell a baby that it's hot, but if they've never felt hot,
They don't understand.
there's nothing to say, well, what would happen if I touch it?
Yeah.
If you've never touched it, and as a parent, and I don't want to go too far left, but as a parent, I think that that's one of the hardest things as a parent is there are so many parents who like there's a misconception of, well, I want to provide my child everything I didn't have, right? And it's like great, like your intent is great, but now what you're doing is you're robbing them of the experiences that you had, and because you had those experiences, that's what shaped your reality. You
Yep.
know what I mean? So for me, it's like I don't want my son to have to get into a fight to know how to defend himself, but I try to create these like uncomfortable experiences for him, not so that he's getting into a fight, but so that if God forbid it ever happens, he'll at least have some emotional responses to say, okay, I've been here before,
Yep.
and I think that that's really what like these rock bottom experiences provide us is like, well, I've been there and I don't want to go back there before, right? Like I don't ever want to put myself in a situation where like this cupcake is gonna be the end
Be
of me, you know.
the
You know, and to everyone learns. That's the one thing that education. So after my NFL experience, I don't call it a career, I call it an experience. After my NFL experience, I did 10 and a half years in education. So I did the past 10
Ah.
and a half years as a school educator. Started off as special education teacher. Now the unique thing that the unique skill set that special education taught me was it increased my emotional intelligence,
Mm.
right? And it increased my emotional intelligence is because when you're dealing with at-risk students or students who have learning disabilities, you learn to differentiate the content so that each learner is learning the way. So now you're creating an equitable experience, right? Where no matter who's in the room, they're all getting what they need specifically, right? To help them understand the content. And that's helped me as a speaker, right? That's helped me as a teacher, as a coach, where experience, going back to your original question, is sometimes the kinesthetic way of people learning because they need to feel it in order to actually learn it. Where me, I'm a visual learner. So like I've been very blessed to learn from people's experiences. So I'm in Vegas, right? My wife's like, why aren't you gambling? As I know who my dad is, why aren't we really, drinking as much? Because I know who my dad is, right? And
Yeah,
my
yeah,
dad is someone who struggled with drugs and alcohol. And as a result of him struggling with it, me visually seeing what life looked like because of that, I'm like, no, I,
yeah,
I don't, you know what I mean? So I say all of that to say that, everyone learns differently, and it's the kinesthetic learners that unfortunately by default have to learn by touching that stove,
yeah.
so yeah.
It's interesting going back to the parent side of things. I was literally having a conversation, like recording it, a conversation last night. Coach, very intelligent, PhD. Um, and one of the things he was talking about, one of the things that you mentioned, just talking about like touching the stove and parenting and things like
Yep.
that, is because my question to him is why do you feel that? I was like, what are the emotions that a lot of the athletes that you're dealing with? And he was like, anxiety across the board, right? And then
Sure.
obviously when it comes to sports, performance anxiety in more
Yep.
particular. And so my question was like, why do you feel anxiety is so high right now? And he's like, well, for a couple of things, obviously screen time and things like that. We're not like physically doing as much. But one of the things he mentioned about is, and you talk about like not touching the stove, is the inability for a lot of kids to take risks for now, like nowadays. It's the parents of like, careful, careful, don't do that, careful, let me help you, let me do this for you, kind of type thing. And his data that he quoted is that boys, like the number of boys having broken arms, I don't know over what period of time, is declined significantly. And he goes, well, that's a good thing, so to speak, that kids aren't having, but he's like, we're not climbing trees, right? Like we're not out like roughhousing, on the playground anymore. We're not out playing like tackle football in the backyard with the neighborhood. We're not staying out till 10 a.m. till your parents whistle you to come in. And so he's like, the inability to take risks of just like being confined by yourself. He's like, I think that drives a lot of the anxiety. And I was like, that's really fascinating because I think there is a lot of power, and that's what stems from performance anxiety. It's the inability to go out there and not want to take the last shot. It's
Yeah.
not wanting the ball in your hand on the last thing because it's the fear of being judged by 10,000 people or just your homie at home.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
That's good. I love that.
Going to like back to the emotional intelligence, and like what you learned like as an educator, what do you feel like? I'll kind of ask you the same question, is like this is one of the things, because I just firmly believe we're like emotional creatures, like we make decisions based off of emotion and we justify it with logic.
Yep.
um what are some of the big hurdles that you see from, and you have a
Yeah.
unique perspective because you can go corporate angle and you can go, more athletic angle too, is
Yep.
what are those big hurdles emotionally that you see people dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think it first starts with people's emotional responses, right? So my biggest perspective shift, any professional development that I'm doing or providing is I want participants, I want my audience to walk away feeling inspired and motivated, but really with strategy on like how to not focus on what's happening, but more so how they respond to what's happening.
Mm,
And I believe that there's a premium on the IQ of who you're hiring or who's leading an organization or a group of people. And there's a low premium on emotional intelligence
yeah.
because it's hard to track it, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to it's tough to put metrics to someone's emotional intelligence, right? But it's the EQ is, and how I frame it is, there's a great deal of high IQ leaders, but the reason why athletes are entering the transfer portal, outside of the money aspect of things, why in education there are so many leaders who are leaving the profession and even in the corporate space, it is because their leaders have high IQ. They can draw up an incredible game plan.
Mhm.
They have the structure of accountability, but they have very low EQ. And because they have very low EQ, they are struggling with creating an environment where their most important asset can thrive. And oftentimes, leaders, we lose sight on what's our most important asset. It's the people we serve, right? It's not the jerseys, it's not the core values plastered on the wall, it's not the mission statement. It's the people that have to show up every single day, right? And we can become so numbers driven and so data focused that we forget that these are human beings that
Yep.
we need to create an environment, right? So I believe that what's missing from an emotional intelligence standpoint, is there's not enough listening taking place. There's not enough leaders learning the people that they serve. There's not enough living the values that we have set for the organization or team. What I mean by living values is, are we chasing something or are we becoming something?
Yeah.
Because those that win championships don't chase champions, they already
Yeah.
are champions.
Yeah.
They value whatever it is that a champion does, they embody that, they live that. So there are so many organizations, and you see this a lot in schools where or in sports where you have, our slogans and our core values plastered everywhere, but nobody's living them, right? We're chasing something that we aren't. And that's the focus, is like, let's shift our perspective from chasing to attracting. And we do that by becoming. And then the other part of it is the empathy aspect of it, right? Where it's like, Ryan, I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes,
Right.
right? But I do have some shared experiences that, if me as your leader is created the space where we can be vulnerable and transparent with one another, I can now meet you where you are
Yeah.
and help develop you and bring you where, and there's just a that's lacking in leadership, is
Yeah.
that, emotionally intelligence aspect of it.
Uh, I love it. I agree wholeheartedly. Two follow-ups to that is it'll be interesting because I ask coaches this and I feel like kind of the generic response,
Sure.
but like since you're kind of like sitting more on like my side of the equation, I'll be curious of like what you've seen to be true is, I always say it's like, when coaches go out or even just people in the sports performance industry. I saw it
Yeah.
like as a gym owner in training athletes that
Mhm.
everyone's kind of slogan is like, we want to create better men and women. And
Right,
I'm
right,
just
right,
like,
right,
bullshit. Like, dude,
right,
you're so
right,
full of it, right?
right,
Like,
right,
and to your
right.
point, where the part that's lacking is the word that I wrote down is like the caring and the connection, right? The
Yeah,
emotional
yeah,
side of like meeting where they are.
yeah,
What have you experienced and kind of seen to be true? Because I feel like that's kind of a missing piece. Now, the greats do it, right? Like the coaches that are, not winning one championship,
yeah,
it's not the one hit wonder,
yeah,
right? It's the ones that build the quote unquote dynasty. There has to be
yeah,
some level of like care and connection to be
yeah.
able to do
That's
that
right.
over and over and over again. So I
Yeah.
guess like just from your perspective is Do you feel like it's a missing piece? Is it, I don't know, give a rough percentage. Do you feel like, 20% of the coaches actually genuinely are there for the human being as they speak and say, right? Like we care about the total athlete. Like, do you? Like, I don't really know if you do or not.
So I think it's like it's conflicting, right? So I'm presenting tomorrow at an educational conference, and I'm speaking to school leaders from across the country. And I bring that up because my answer to you is essentially what I'm going to be presenting and what I present to coaches on is
Perfect.
there is conflict between why you decided to do this and how you're actually going about doing what it is you said you
Mm,
want, right? So I always ask, like, hey, why'd you decide to become a school leader? Why'd you decide to become an educator? And what you find is, and this isn't surprising data, but what you find in the data is almost 100% of the room, not say 100, let me say majority of the room that I facilitated this question in, they don't say anything about lesson planning. They don't say anything about the playbook that they created for their team. They don't say anything about, like the X's and O's of the work. They always say, well, I want to be that coach that I didn't have, or there was this coach that changed my life and he did these things, and as a result, that's what I want to do for the next generation. Or I want to be this teacher because I want to help the next generation become better leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, okay, cool. Now that's why you chose to do this, but your behavior is not aligned to why you chose to do this. So
mm,
there's conflict where I truly do believe that most educators, or let's in the athletic realm, I truly believe that most coaches, when they start off, right, their why is I want to help this these boys or these girls or
totally.
this group of athletes because of an experience of pain or pleasure that I've had, right? Almost any coach, they'll have a story for you of like
Yeah.
that moment where it clicked, like, yo, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And then I say, well, you're not struggling in like why you're doing it. You're struggling. The gap isn't the why, the gap is the how, right? The gap is there's no connection between the who, right? There, there's no bridge between your why and the who, and then the what, right? I believe that the who, why, and what in any situation, the bridge is the connecting piece of it, right? So when you're connecting with the people that you serve, now you're taking the approach of I have 5 athletes who come from 5 different places from across the country. I can either give them this one thing and say that this is the one size fits all, or I can say I'm going to figure out what are the needs of all 5 of these individuals, and I'm going to give them individually what they need to
Yeah.
thrive in this environment. And I think, and I, from what I've seen in any environment that thrives, if it's football, if it's track, if it's a classroom or a meeting, it's we do not have expectations that exceed our coaching and development of its people.
Yeah.
So every environment that I've been a part of that's been a thriving environment, or any environment that's built dynasties, is there is a premium on we develop people, right? So if we need you to understand this playbook, we might need to develop your studying skills
Yeah.
prior to this
Yeah. It's
expectation
good.
of you know what I mean? So when teachers create this environment for the students in their classroom, it's not from a you're supposed to learn this. It's like, let me take some time to connect with my students and see like what kind of music do they like?
Yeah.
What kind of snack? Who's in? Who do they go to when things get tough? So now, when I'm having an issue with this person, because I've taken the time to get to know them, now I don't have to do it alone. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I can, Ryan, I can keep going on and on about this because I truly believe that this is what builds positive culture
Yeah.
is when its leaders put a premium and they prioritize the development of its people. There's so many coaches, there's so many educators that have high expectations and low teaching. And as a result of that, it creates the conflict that we don't win anything
Yeah.
because we're expecting you to come already equipped. And it's like, no, that's just not how it works.
Yeah, and it makes
You
me
know?
think of too is a mentor for me. Um, he was like, Ryan, fill in the blank. He was like, you're a human. And I was like, being. And he was like, yeah. He's like, you're not a human doing. And he was like,
Mm,
oftentimes you're always
wow,
asking,
that's good. That's good.
he's like, what,
That's
right?
good.
I come to him, I'm
That's
like, what do I
good.
need to do? And he goes,
That's
no matter
good.
what I tell you what to do, you're not going to do it because
Wow.
you're not being the
Wow.
person. He's like, you have to
Wow.
become the
Man,
person first.
that is so
Right.
good. That is so
So, and
good.
I like
Man,
literally connects the
yeah,
dots of like exactly what you're
that is so
saying
good.
is like
Wow. Wow.
they got in this for a
That's good.
reason. And
That's
now they're
good.
like, okay, like what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What do I
That's
need to
so
do? It's
good.
like, no, 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 no. You don't need to do anything. You need to like remember, become that person that you said that you were getting in here, and everything else will start, the dominoes will start to trickle over because you'll figure out what to do
Yep.
because you'll think differently. It's being,
Yeah.
thinking, doing. And so it's like you got to become the person, you'll start to think like them, and then the actions and the behaviors and what
That's
you
so good.
do will follow that. And so it
That's
kind
so
of
good.
goes back to the original thing of like to me it's like why identity comes first versus even like as I meet with coaches and they come in they're like okay like what do we need to do I'm like you're not gonna like my answer because ultimately it's like no matter what I tell you is like either one you're going to think you're just not going to do it because it's not who you are, right? Like if I tell you, it's like, I mean, how many self development, like they all personal development, they all say the exact same thing. And like now
Yeah.
it just expands. It's like,
Yeah.
read, right? Like, and I was like, for years, I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, how is picking up a book going to change your life kind
Yeah.
of type
Yeah.
thing? And then you start to pick one up and you start to like see the world differently. It's like now I'm shifting who I am. And so it's like
Yeah.
getting them, it's like you got to get out of this old world and into this new world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
That's
I
good.
think too, like to your point is I was at a camp and I don't even know how we got on the topic, but it was a reminder and an aha moment of exactly what you're saying is I think a lot of coaches I've had have really challenged me on like, what space are you in? And Ryan, there's only three spaces. There's health, there's wealth, and there's relationships. And I was like,
Mm.
I don't like, but like I help people win, right? I help people like perform better. And I was like, I don't really know. And so it took me a long time. And to like the more I talked about it, I was like, well, I'm in the relationship space, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the space that I'm in.
Yeah.
That's the
Big
space
time.
that's like the winning, the culture, the
Yeah.
leadership, all of that is kind of more or less, yeah, that's what they want. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's like if you don't understand know exactly what space you're in, you'll never win.
That's good. Yep. I agree. I
So
agree.
how did you end up, or actually, let me back up. What came first? More of transforming athletes or transforming educators?
Yeah, man. So I think because of my unique uh story, right, as a former pro athlete, a huge part of, the outer of who I am and what I've done, or I shouldn't say who I am, but more so of what I've done and how the narrative around who Jeremiah Brown is, right? As this former NFL athlete, this author, this educational consultant, it's like all of these different hats and me being clear on like who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
Uh, I've been so here's why I left education after 11 years. It wasn't because I'm this entrepreneur who's like, well, 9 to 5s are evil and 9 to 5s are like the worst thing ever, right? No, I miss working in schools. I loved my career in education. However, I'm a father and a husband first, and because I am that, and I'm running a business, and I'm leading a school, there were so many things that were conflicting.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I knew I wanted to do was, I knew my gift of what I've been blessed with was meant for the world.
Right.
You know, I don't, it's just something that it was implanted in my heart, and I just can't shake it. So I always felt like in every school that I was in, like, man, only the athletes here get this, only the educators here get this. And I feel like for what's been planted in me, it's meant for the world to hear
Yeah.
and to impact. And I give you that foundation because as a speaker and presenter, I have an audience that is catered to the athletes because of my story. But because of my experience, it's given me the opportunity to not be confined to just athletics,
Right.
right? Where like I was a school leader, you know, I hired an onboarded staff, you know, I was responsible for the social, emotional, and the culture building of the schools that I were part of. I was a professional athlete, you know, I was captain of my teams, and you know, I got a scholarship to play Division 1 ball. And so like I've done with most outside of win a championship, you know, or Super Bowl, right? I've done what most people that want to play professional sports have done,
Yeah.
right? So it gives me that range to speak to that audience. But because of my experience outside of playing sports, it's really, really blessed me with the corporate, you know, angle. So I say that to close on, I only occupy two lanes.
Yeah.
Um, and I believe if you said, well, what's the thing you want to be known for? It's career and life skills. And I believe that leadership, development, emotional intelligence, these are life skills that we can develop. But because leadership is such a broad thing, and to your point, it's what most people say they want or need, there's a
It's the
premium on leadership development,
it's the
right?
buzzword.
It's the buzzword, right? So as because it's a buzzword, and I understand my audience in the marketplace, I've separated the two, right? So there's a leadership and culture development lane, and there is a career and life skills lane. So if I'm speaking to a leader across any industry, if it's K through 12, if it's higher education, if it's corporate, I am going to provide them a transformative experience to help them approach their work in leadership with more emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
right? So I'm biased. I believe there's only one way to effectively lead an organization or people, and that's servant leadership. So I'm providing an experience from a servant leadership lens, and that's the only lens I'm providing. As broad as leadership is, I'm
Yeah.
only going down
Yeah.
that lane,
Yeah.
you know. And then career and life skills is that piece that it's still connected to leadership, but it's that piece to help our students and or athletes lead a life of purpose,
Yeah.
right? Because they're clear on who they are, they're clear on what they do, they're clear on why they do it, and they're clear on who it impacts, right? So those components for me is like it fills me up, you know.
Yeah.
So you know, yeah, I'm in a place now where I'm going from saying I speak about these 20 different things
Yeah.
to I only do these two things, and I do these two things really, really well, you know?
Yeah.
So, yep.
Well, it's funny too of like you talk about like I guess in business they call it like knowing your avatar, right? But like,
Hmm.
dude, the buzzwords are a thing, man.
Yeah,
Like
man. I don't even use the word transition. You know what I mean? Like the transition and leadership and mental health, like all of the, yeah, man, yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny because in the especially I think a lot of in sports, but especially in like the gymnastics world,
yep.
where I've got a solid footprint in the college world of that, it's the
Hmm.
most hysterical thing because confidence is that word, right? Like
Yeah.
that is the word. Like you mention that and like everyone turns their head, right? And it never fails because I firmly, firmly believe is like one of my big things, no matter who I'm talking to, is like words matter, and most people throw around words, and I'm like, okay, what does that word mean? Just
Yeah,
like
that's good.
leadership, I'll go in, I'm
That's
like
good.
define that for me, and they're like, well, I
That's
don't
good.
know. So it never fails. I'm like, okay, raise your hand if anyone in this room wants more confidence, right? Like in everyone. It doesn't matter if it's college all the way down to like when I'm at like camps with 8-year-olds, right? I'm like, okay, tell me what it means. And like everyone just like looks at me. I'm like, okay, so y'all been on this hunt for 10 years for this thing called confidence. And you have
That's
no, I was
good.
like, it's literally like your
That's
parents
good.
going, telling you to go to the grocery store and buy apples and
That's
you don't know
good.
what apples are. They're like, you're
That's
never
good.
going to find it. Well, no wonder. It's
That's
like we
good.
have to give these things meaning. And so to that point of like, I think as I expand in the sports and athletic world is understanding and figuring out like, okay, what is the buzzword that, rings the bell? And then it's like, okay, but you don't even know what that means. So like, let's go. Why I'm going to help you with that is because one, I'm going to give you an actual definition that like is applicable and that you can use. But I think that's been kind of like the hurdle for me is like understanding, okay, like baseball, what is it? Is it
Yeah.
mindset, right? Like, like
Yeah. Yeah.
football, what is it over
Yeah.
here? Because like you throw around confidence in like football, they're like,
Yeah.
all
Right.
right, like whatever. Like
Right.
we're
Right.
good. We don't need any of that
Right.
stuff.
Right. That's good.
What is so in
That's
the
good.
corporate side, is it both leadership and on the athletics and corporate side? Or do they
Yeah.
like that career in life? Is that the lane that they
So what I've realized is how you identify like what your avatar or what your lane is you have to first identify like what problems you solve,
totally.
right? So when you think about um different sports, like you said, language is so important, right? So if you use language of confidence in football, it's like, bro, like if you're not confident about running through this person, we don't want you. We're not looking to recruit you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas in gymnastics, it's a bit different, right? Because there's a lot that goes into like, flipping up in the air and like landing correctly and all of those things that, you can witness someone get injured and that throw you off. And now you don't believe you can, all of these things, right? So for me, it's like if in every industry, maybe industry might not be the right word, but when you think of like, let me use K through 12, let me use higher education and the corporate space. Like these are the three different audiences that
yeah,
I occupy space in, right?
yeah.
My lane. So in each of those, the one thing that they all have in common is they have decision makers,
Mm,
right? And these decision makers are typically the people that are part of the hiring process. They are part of providing you a grade on how you are doing in your specific role. That audience specifically, it's only going to be leadership and culture development because
yeah,
that's their role. The problems that they are having within said organization is a direct result of the leadership taking place, right? Of what's happening and what's not happening, right? So I've identified that if I'm in a K through 12 setting, now can I speak about leadership development with students and things like that? For sure. You know what I mean? But the problem that students are having isn't necessarily a leadership problem. So I'm not going
mhm,
to use leadership with them,
yeah,
right? So I'm going to use they are struggling with their confidence. They're struggling with their emotional intelligence on how they respond to what's happening around them. So in K through 12, I'm not using leadership. I'm using social emotional learning, right? Because that's a gap that is in education right now. And everybody's trying to figure out how to provide that
yeah,
information to their students. Now, the staff, it's more how can we provide an environment that our students can thrive in? That's leadership and culture,
yeah,
right? The same similar core storytelling and principles and who I am in these spaces don't change.
yeah,
I'll tell the same story
totally.
just in a different way. You know what I mean? So now in higher education, it's completely different, right? Because it's not social emotional learning. Now, do athletes need it? For sure. But I always start with You are responsible as the director of student athlete development for the programming of your athletes. Have you ever worked with an athlete that chose a major that they did not intend on using in the real world because they just chose the path of least resistance? Almost every single person responsible for programming and providing their athletes or students experiences to broaden their sense of readiness are dealing with that. That's a
Totally.
problem. And they
Yeah.
don't know how to fix it. Like, yo, this kid, Jeremiah, he sat down and he said he's gonna take sociology. And I asked him why, and he's just like, because he likes it. How do I help him find something else he likes? And I say, well, we have to get our kids to understand that your major is like, we have to get them to understand what a major is. So what helped me understand, I was using the wrong language. I was in the
Yeah.
collegiate space saying leadership development. They don't need leadership development.
Yeah.
They
That's
need
good.
help with clarity, not and here's why I don't use the word transition. Because to your point, Ryan, these buzzwords, when most people hear transition, it's like, oh man, here's this word again, transition. Like in most people's job description in sports, none of it requires them to help people with the transition, right?
Right.
Like you were hired to become this coach to help someone execute these plays. Now, there is pressure for coaches to provide a transformative experience of career readiness, but that's not really their job,
Yeah.
right? So I had to look at the landscape and say, okay, where are the gaps? Where are the problems that lie in those gaps? And based on what I do, where's my value add? You know what
Mm.
I mean? So yeah, it's really all ties to the problems that we solve and that and leading from that, because what that does is it allows me to keep the integrity of I just want to add value,
Yeah.
right? Like you're currently dealing with this and I can provide some value that can help you navigate the nuances of whatever it is that you're going through. And that helps me focus, keep the focus on who I'm serving as opposed to anything that I might want. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So,
I
yeah, man.
imagine, I imagine, is it true too, at the professional level, the word transition? Like we're gonna
Oh
help
man,
you.
yeah, it doesn't help at all. You know what I mean? It doesn't, it gives people anxiety, right? Because it's just like,
Right.
man, it transition, and it's like, no, that's transition isn't the problem. It's the lack of soft skills that they don't have and they're deficient of, which makes the transition. So there are a lot of people who are in the transition space, and the reason why they aren't thriving in the space is because to help someone in the transition while they're going through the transition is not a great plan of action. It
Yeah.
is helping them develop the self-efficacy to properly communicate, to properly identify what deficiencies they have, and helping them close those gaps so that no matter what transition they go through in life, they are emotionally present to respond in the way that's going to push them forward as opposed to hold them back. And you
Yeah.
mentioned this earlier is there are many people who operate out of feelings, and that's the one thing from a leadership development standpoint. I say emotions are information, not instructions,
Mm.
right? And a
Mm.
good buddy of mine, David Kitchens, is who said that, and he it inspired me because we feel these things, and as athletes, high level athletes, we're told to compress them or to like, oh, get over it. And it's like, no, no, no. Like emotional intelligence isn't disregarding what you're feeling. Emotional intelligence is I feel this and I'm not gonna let it control my decision and my
Yeah.
response. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So yeah, man, I'm just so passionate about this. But yeah, that's essentially yeah.
Well, and I think it's getting them to, I think especially in the athletic space, is have a chart and it has like five things on it. And at the top of the chart is it flows down, but at the top of the chart is thoughts, and at the bottom is feelings and emotions. And there's a few in between. And
Yeah.
so I always ask as I circle the five, I'm like, okay, listen to the question and then answer, right? And so
Yeah.
it's which one's the most powerful? And
Yep.
so actually I'll tell you five. So it's your thoughts determine your choices, choices determine behaviors, behaviors
Yep.
determine your experiences, and experiences create an emotion. It's
Yep.
essentially what it is. And so
Yep.
they all, I'm like, okay, raise your hand for which one you vote for. So obviously in the sports realm is, I would say the majority, probably 70, 80% vote for thoughts, right? Like that's the most powerful thing because they're like, just think positive, right? Like, and everything will be
Right.
okay. I'm like,
Right.
but here's the thing is like the question was just which one's most powerful? And the most
Mm,
powerful one is your emotions. It's like, how many of you guys have gone to an event? You need a diaper because you're about to shit your pants because you don't know what's about to happen. You want it to be over with. You're like, I don't know what I want to do. Da, 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 da. You just like, you're
yeah.
overwhelmed and like everyone raises their hand. I'm like, great. And that Coach Billy, who told you to just think positive, and all of a sudden you try to talk yourself like, you got this, you got this, you got this. And I'm like, but nothing changes. And they're like, yeah.
Right.
I'm like, because you can't, like, you're literally, that emotion is, it's actually, at least in the data that I have, it says it's 5 times more powerful. That part of your brain is 5 times more powerful than your logical thinking brain. And so you're not going to be able to talk yourself out of it. And to your point of like the professional side is like it's not compressing and controlling, it's managing because you're never
Yeah.
going to like you're never not going to have stress. Like that's just
Yeah.
not a thing. You're never going to
Yeah.
not be sad. You're never going to not like you
Yeah.
those that is how we're wired. And
Yeah.
so it's getting them to understand it's like
That's good.
what you want is unrealistic to never be
Yeah.
stressed, to never be
Right.
sad, to never have
Right.
anxiety. It's like you actually
Right.
want those things because the lion's chasing you, you want to freak out because that's going to
Yeah.
give you the
Yeah.
adrenaline to take off and run,
For sure.
right? Like
For sure.
that's the cliche example.
That's good.
Um, but I think of like I love that is that concept of like learning to manage them and
Yeah.
it's okay. We all feel those, even like I can't tell you how many like coaches that I talk to, like they're not even the ones competing and they have anxiety. I'm like, you don't even have to do anything.
Right. 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 Right.
You don't even, it's not even like
That's
football. You
good.
don't even have to call a play. You're just standing there. You've
Yeah.
coached, like, especially like
Yeah.
in gymnastics, you coach, now you just watch. That's just kind
Yeah.
of like the nature of it. And they're freaking out, right? And
Yeah.
I'm like,
For
all
sure.
that's energy. So we got to learn to control those because, yeah, all that can be, to me, all that can be felt in a room.
Big time. Big
Um,
time.
Kind of like I give the, especially when talking with like female athletes, I'm like, I know y'all been in Walmart and like you looked at your friend and been like, creepy dude right behind us, we need to get it and go, right? Like, and they're like 100%. I'm like, yeah, you
Yeah.
didn't even
Right.
talk to the
Right.
guy, but you felt like it was just off.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess what's the like future pace, if you will? Like where do you want to take this? What do you want to do? I know you said like
Yeah.
you just felt like that this was like you're called doing what you're called to do in the sense
Yep.
of like everyone in the world, so to
Yep.
speak, to know about these things. So like what's kind of the future plans for you and like where you want to take it, where you want to grow it towards?
Man, that's a great question, and I don't have all of the clarity on that. I just know that it's gonna come in just me doing and showing up consistently, for like and I like that because it's helping me just remain present.
Yeah.
I do have, a 3 to 5 to 10 year plan, like for personal things that I want to do and accomplish within like my family and stuff like that. But like for the business side of things and like what I truly believe I've been assigned to do professionally, right now, man, it's just bringing awareness, to organizations why emotional intelligence is important, and it needs to be something that's prioritized in how they develop leaders.
Yeah.
And from a career and life skill standpoint, is I just want more people in this world to live in purpose as opposed to in fear. And I think that there are so many people living in fear because they just lack information, and I just really want to get the information out there. And then from there, I definitely want to be a thought partner, um, in my space, in those lanes that I occupy.
Yeah.
So my goal is to continue to grow, myself personally and professionally, creating just different transformative experiences. If that's conferences, if that's the podcast, if that's, the books that we write, and just different transformative experiences that will help someone confidently navigate this life with purpose,
Yeah.
and just know the who's, the what's, the whys, and the hows, and that all came from my rock bottom moment for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and it's, the power comes in. I, from again, as having a conversation with a coach last night, and he does this, and I think that he doesn't realize that he's in the minority on side of things. Is
Yeah,
I think, especially probably at the college and professional level, at least in athletics, like ego plays like a really big role in terms of like coaches
big
not
time,
being vulnerable. And
big time.
so it's like that is where so much of the care and the connection lacks. Because they're like, well, back in my day, you wouldn't have made it. It's like, bro, no one cares, right? Like,
Right, right,
no one
right,
cares that you played with leather helmets. Great. We don't do that anymore. Like, we're not idiots, right? Like, and so I just feel like, like obviously, like you sharing your stories. And again, for me, that's like the whole, not the whole, but like a major reason of like the podcast is like
Yep,
the more stories are out there, the more people will connect with
yep,
things, because like
yep,
not everybody's going to relate to my story. Not everybody's going to relate to your story. But
yep,
if you get 1,000 episodes out there, it's like surely somebody can find something. They're just like,
yep,
yeah, like that person, like I feel understood, because I feel like that's what people crave. They just want to be seen, they want to be heard, right? And the
yep,
moment they feel
yep, yep.
understood is like that's when they make a decision to make a change like in their life. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's cool. Last question for you. If you were in a stadium with 100,000 people and you
Mm.
could only leave them with one message, what would your message be?
Man, that's so good, man. So in this world, there are so many things that are going to shift your focus to the outcome of what it is you want to accomplish. As I like to frame it, the prize.
Yeah.
If there's one thing I could leave you with is the anxiety, the depression, and even the thoughts of maybe why you may not belong here on earth. What's contributing to those is the lack of clarity that you have in your process. And what I want you to focus on is not the prize or the outcome of what you want in this world, but the process and who you need to become, so that you can go from chasing something to attracting it. And I don't want you to ever have to chase the bag. I want you to become the bag. And,
Yeah.
and, and you do that by not running from the work. And the work happens in the process, because there are so many people that have been told to trust the process and they don't know what it means. And trusting the process is this: trusting the process is knowing that who and what it is that you want in this world, you are currently not that person yet.
Yeah.
And the process is the work towards you becoming who you need to be to not just obtain said goal, but to sustain it,
Yeah.
and we don't need any more jackpot winners winning $1 million and they don't have $1 million worth of skill sets
Yep.
to turn that into more money. So what happens? They lose it,
Yep.
right? And that's what happens to most people is they obtain what they want, but their character sucks,
Yep.
their discipline sucks, and yeah, man. So I know that was long winded, but just focus on the process and not the prize, and don't run from the work, and that
Yeah.
will really put you in a position to embrace the challenges that are coming, because they're coming, you know. But when you embrace them and you ask yourself, like, what am I supposed to learn from what's happening to me, as opposed to this is an attack and I don't belong here. Those are all false statements. You do belong here. You are needed here, and you are the solution to a problem that exists in this world.
Yep. I always say it's the way when I was at rock bottom is my mentor. She told me she was just like the root of everything, right? Like she says, the root of 99.999% of things is like, she's like, you just feel unworthy. And she's like, we're going to
Yeah,
help you like start to
yeah,
feel worthy. And so
that's
it's like
good.
at the root of everything, it's like, well, why don't you believe that you can have that? If you keep going down, down, it's like you just don't
Yep.
feel worthy that you're the person to have it. So I
Yep.
love it,
That's
dude,
good.
man. I appreciate you jumping on. I appreciate you
No.
sharing stories. I appreciate all the knowledge and wisdom. And yeah, dude, we'll definitely stay connected from here.
Yes, absolutely, man. I appreciate the opportunity, man. This was very insightful. Man, I learned a lot today as well. So I took some notes here.
I
So
love it. I love
yeah,
it.
I
Until next
appreciate you,
time,
man.
everybody.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Peace.
sir.